The palace gardens were quiet after midnight. Lanterns glowed softly along the stone pathways, while music from the royal banquet drifted faintly through the open arches surrounding the courtyard. Nerissa Vale carried a stack of council documents against her chest as she crossed the eastern corridor toward the royal wing. She almost didn't hear the voices ahead. Then one sentence stopped her completely. "You'll stand beside me when I take the throne." Nerissa froze mid-step. Beyond the ivy-covered archway, the Alpha King stood beneath the lantern light with another woman beside the fountain garden, not discussing politics, not negotiating alliances, promising. The woman smiled softly. "And your council will actually accept me?" "They'll accept whoever I choose," the Alpha King replied calmly. Nerissa didn't move. 3 nights earlier, he had stood inside her chambers after another exhausting council meeting, hands resting against her waist while he said quietly, "Stay close to me. Trust me a little longer." At the time, she had believed him. Now, he was offering someone else the future. The woman beside him stepped closer. "What about Nerissa?" Silence lasted only a second. Then the Alpha King answered smoothly. "She understands her place." Something inside Nerissa went completely still, not shattered, not broken, worse, certain, because suddenly every delayed promise finally made sense. The secret meetings, the hidden affection, the constant waiting, not temporary, intentional. The other woman laughed softly. "You say that confidently." "I know her," he replied. That was enough. Nerissa stepped backward silently before either of them noticed her standing there. The documents in her arms suddenly felt unbearably heavy. She turned carefully and walked back down the corridor without making a sound. No confrontation, no tears, no dramatic interruption. Just quiet footsteps against cold stone while the conversation behind her continued like nothing important had happened. By the time she reached the royal staircase, her decision was already made. Not tomorrow, not after explanations. Tonight. She would leave before sunrise, and this time, she would do it without saying goodbye. Nerissa closed her chamber doors softly behind her. The palace beyond them remained alive with distant music and laughter from the royal banquet downstairs, but inside her rooms, everything felt strangely calm. Too calm. She set the council documents neatly onto her desk before crossing toward the wardrobe beside the window. No shaking hands, no tears. That part surprised her most. She should have been devastated. Instead, she felt clear, like the last missing answer had finally arrived. Nerissa pulled a small travel bag from beneath the wardrobe bench and placed it carefully on the bed. 1 cloak, 2 dresses, coin pouch, knife, nothing sentimental, nothing heavy enough to slow her down. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly across the mountains. Rain was coming. Good. Storms made tracking harder. A quiet knock sounded against her chamber doors. "My lady?" a servant called gently. Nerissa paused only briefly before answering normally. "Come in." The young servant entered carrying folded linens before stopping in confusion. "Are you traveling?" "For a while," the girl blinked. "At this hour?" Nerissa fastened the final buckle on her bag. "Yes, but the gates close after midnight." "Not all of them." The servant looked uncertain. "Should I inform the Alpha King?" That almost made Nerissa smile. "No." A pause. Then quietly, "He's occupied." The servant lowered her gaze immediately, sensing something she didn't fully understand. Nerissa crossed toward her writing desk and slowly removed the palace crest ring from her finger. Silver. Royal seal engraved into the center. The symbol everyone associated with proximity to the future throne. For a moment, she stared at it silently beneath the candlelight. Then she placed it neatly atop the unfinished council reports. Done. The servant finally whispered, "My lady, are you coming back?" Nerissa lifted her travel cloak over her shoulders. "I don't think so." The girl inhaled sharply, but before she could speak again, Nerissa moved toward the hidden panel behind the eastern bookshelf. The servant's eyes widened instantly. The south passage? Nerissa pressed the release mechanism calmly. Stone shifted quietly open. Only royal staff knew the route existed. That knowledge alone would buy her hours before anyone realized where she'd gone. She adjusted the strap over her shoulder, then looked back once toward the room she had spent years waiting inside, waiting for promises, waiting for certainty, waiting for a future someone else had already offered away. Nerissa extinguished the final candle beside the door and disappeared into the hidden passage without another word. The Alpha King returned to the royal floor shortly after midnight, still dressed in formal black ceremonial wear, still carrying the scent of rain and garden roses from outside. An advisor approached immediately. "Your Majesty, tomorrow's northern delegation requested—" "Later," he said distractedly. His attention had already shifted toward the eastern corridor, toward Nerissa's chambers. The lights beneath her doors were dark. Strange, she usually waited awake after council banquets, especially on politically tense nights like this one. The Alpha King walked toward her rooms anyway. A servant spotted him instantly and bowed quickly. "Your Majesty." "Where is Nerissa?" The servant hesitated. That alone sharpened his expression. "She left, my king." Silence. "What?" The servant swallowed nervously. "Her chambers are empty." The Alpha King stepped past her immediately and pushed open the doors himself. Cold darkness greeted him. The room was spotless. Too spotless. No scattered belongings, no half-finished work, no sign of rushed emotion, only absence. His gaze landed on the writing desk and stopped. The palace crest ring sat neatly beside stacked council reports, returned, intentional. Behind him, another advisor entered cautiously. "Your Majesty?" The Alpha King picked up the ring slowly. "How long ago?" "We don't know." "That's not an answer." The servant flinched. "No guards saw her leave through the main gates." His eyes narrowed immediately. "Then how did she leave?" Silence answered first. Then realization crossed the older advisor's face. "The south passage." The room went still instantly, because only trusted palace staff knew the hidden route existed, and Nerissa had used it without hesitation. The Alpha King closed his hand tightly around the ring. "Search the lower roads." "My king," the advisor began carefully, "the northern delegation arrives at dawn." "I said search." The command cracked hard enough to clear the room immediately. Only the older advisor remained behind. The Alpha King stared silently at the ring in his palm. "She heard something," the advisor said quietly. No answer came, because both of them already knew. The advisor continued carefully. "Nerissa doesn't disappear impulsively. If she left this cleanly, she left with certainty." That landed. Hard. The Alpha King's gaze shifted slowly toward the open balcony doors beyond the chamber, toward the palace gardens outside. Memory struck instantly. What about Nerissa? She understands her place. Silence stretched. Then the Alpha King finally spoke. Low, sharp. She wasn't supposed to hear that. But even as he said it, he realized the truth. It no longer mattered whether she was supposed to hear it, because she had. And now she was gone. Rain began just before dawn, cold, heavy, relentless. The Alpha King stood at the palace entrance watching soldiers prepare horses beneath torchlight while thunder rolled across the distant forest roads. "Search every southern route," he ordered. "Check the lower villages and border crossings." Captains moved instantly. No one questioned the urgency in his voice, not after seeing Nerissa's chambers, not after seeing the returned ring. A scout mounted quickly. If she traveled alone, the storm may erase the trail before sunrise. Then move faster. The horses disappeared into the rain moments later. Behind him, palace servants whispered nervously along the corridor walls. She really left? Without guards? Why would she do that? The Alpha King ignored them all because the answer was obvious now. She left because she finally stopped waiting. The thought irritated him more than it should have. Not because it was false, because it was accurate. An advisor approached carefully holding a folded scouting report. "We found this near the southern woodland path." The Alpha King took it immediately. Inside, a small silver clasp from Nerissa's traveling cloak, placed deliberately between the folds. Not lost. Left behind. Another message without words. The advisor watched his expression carefully. She planned the route in advance. Yes. There's no panic in anything she left behind. The Alpha King stared at the clasp silently. No emotional note, no accusations, no desperate farewell. Only precision. That unsettled him far more than anger would have, because anger implied attachment. This felt colder, final. A captain returned through the rain an hour later. "No carriage tracks, my king." "Then she's on foot." "Looks that way." The Alpha King's jaw tightened slightly. "She hates traveling in storms." The captain hesitated. "Then she had reason." Silence. The rain intensified harder against the palace stone around them. Finally, another scout rode through the gates at full speed. "My king!" The horse barely stopped before the man dismounted. "We found tracks." The Alpha King stepped forward instantly. "Where?" The scout lowered his voice carefully. "Eastern route." Everything went still, because the eastern roads led toward only one thing: rival territory. The captain beside him frowned immediately. "That can't be intentional." But the Alpha King already knew better. Nerissa never moved without intention. The scout continued quietly. "She crossed the lower forest pass before the storm deepened." "How far ahead?" "Several hours." Silence stretched heavily. Then the Alpha King turned sharply toward the waiting horses. "Prepare the border riders." The captain's expression changed immediately. "You think she's really going there?" The Alpha King mounted without hesitation. "No," he said coldly. "I think she already did." By sunrise, the rain had weakened to a cold mist hanging low across the eastern forest. Nerissa walked steadily along the narrow mountain road, boots soaked through from hours of rain and mud. She hadn't stopped once, not for rest, not to reconsider. The border stones appeared through the fog ahead shortly after dawn, black granite markers carved with the crest of the Eastern Territory, Rhaegor Vyre's land. Nerissa slowed slightly as she approached them. Not from fear, from awareness. Crossing this border would make everything permanent. Behind her lay the palace she had quietly built her life around. Ahead, uncertainty. But at least uncertainty was honest. "You walked a long way alone." The voice came from the ridge above. Deep, controlled. Nerissa looked up immediately. Alpha King Rhaegor Vyre stood overlooking the border path beside two armed guards dressed in dark eastern armor. None of them looked surprised to find her there. That told her enough already. Rhaegor descended the ridge slowly, boots barely making sound against the wet stone. "You know who I am," he said once he reached the road. "Yes. And you crossed into my territory anyway." "Yes." His gaze sharpened slightly. "Interesting decision." Nerissa adjusted the strap of her travel bag. "I wasn't aware permission was required." One of the guards stiffened at that answer. Rhaegor almost smiled. "Almost." "No," he said calmly. "Only certainty." Silence stretched briefly between them. Then his eyes moved over her rain-soaked cloak, muddy boots, and exhausted posture. "You left quickly. I left permanently." That changed something subtle in his expression. Not surprise, recognition. Rhaegor glanced back toward the western road, disappearing into the forest behind her. "Does he know yet?" Nerissa answered honestly. "Probably." "And?" "And that doesn't change anything." A quiet wind moved through the trees around them. Rhaegor studied her carefully for another long moment before asking the question directly. "What finally made you leave?" Nerissa looked past him toward the eastern lands beyond the border. "He promised another woman a future. she said quietly. Understanding settled instantly across his face. Not confusion, not curiosity, understanding. And you heard it yourself. Yes. Rhaegor nodded once slowly, like that explained everything necessary. Because maybe it did. After a moment, he stepped aside from the border road, making space, not forcing, offering. You crossed voluntarily, he said. Yes. Then no one drags you back. The words hit harder than expected, not because they sounded dramatic, because they sounded absolute. For the first time since leaving the palace, Nerissa finally breathed easier. Then she crossed fully into Eastern territory and didn't stop walking. The Western riders arrived less than an hour later. Horses thundered through the mist-covered forest roads, while Eastern border guards shifted instantly into defensive formation along the stone ridge. Rhaegor stood unmoving near the crossing point, waiting. Nerissa remained several steps behind him beneath the shelter of the eastern gate arch, travel cloak still damp from rain. She didn't hide, but she didn't step forward either. The Alpha King dismounted before his horse fully stopped. His eyes found Nerissa immediately. Relief appeared first, then frustration, then something sharper once he noticed where she stood, behind Rhaegor, inside Eastern territory. You're late, Rhaegor said calmly. The Alpha King ignored him completely. Nerissa. She met his gaze evenly. No anger. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He stepped forward toward the border stones. Eastern guards instantly lowered spears across the path. This doesn't involve you, he said coldly to Rhaegor. Rhaegor folded his arms. It involved me the moment she crossed my border. She belongs to my court, Nerissa answered before Rhaegor could. No, she said quietly. I belong to your convenience. Silence hit hard across both groups of soldiers. The Alpha King's expression tightened instantly. That's not fair. Isn't it? He took another step forward. You left without speaking to me. Nerissa almost smiled at that. You already spoke. The words landed like a blade because he knew exactly which conversation she meant. Rhaegor watched the realization cross his rival's face slowly. The Alpha King lowered his voice carefully now. You heard the garden conversation. Yes, it wasn't what you think. Really? Nerissa asked calmly. Then explain my place to me again. Silence answered first. Another mistake. The Eastern guards exchanged glances quietly while tension thickened across the border road. Rhaegor finally spoke again. She left because certainty arrived before honesty did. The Alpha King snapped his attention toward him. Stay out of this. No. The single word came cold and immediate. Rhaegor stepped slightly closer to the borderline. You promised another woman the future while expecting this one to remain waiting quietly beside you, he said. That became my business when she crossed into my land alone. The Alpha King's jaw tightened visibly. Nerissa, he said again, softer now. Come back. She looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly. No. Nothing moved after that. Not the soldiers, not the wind. Because everyone standing there understood something important at the exact same moment. The decision had already been made long before he arrived, and he had come too late to change it. The mist curled low across the border stones while silence stretched between them. The Alpha King looked at Nerissa like he still expected hesitation. Like years of loyalty would eventually pull her back toward him if he waited long enough. Nerissa noticed. That hurt more than the garden conversation, because even now, he still didn't fully understand why she left. You're making this final too quickly, he said carefully. Rhaegor leaned lightly against the eastern gatepost nearby, silent for once. Watching, Nerissa answered first. No, I stayed too long. The Alpha King stepped closer to the borderline again. You heard one conversation? I heard enough. It was political. She almost laughed. That's the explanation? It's the truth. No, Nerissa replied softly. The truth was the part where you said I understood my place. His expression shifted instantly. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Silence. Another mistake. Nerissa continued calmly. You promised another woman the future while asking me to keep waiting quietly in the background. That's not fair. Neither was building loyalty around uncertainty. The words landed visibly. Behind him, even his own guards avoided looking directly at him now, because everyone understood what she was saying. The issue was never another woman. It was being treated as temporary, as manageable, as someone expected to remain no matter what future she was offered. The Alpha King lowered his voice further. You know what the council is like. Yes. They would have resisted you beside the throne. And instead of fighting that, Nerissa replied, you solved the problem by moving me out of the future entirely. Nothing answered her immediately, because there was nothing untrue inside the accusation. Rhaegor finally spoke quietly from beside the gate. He thought loyalty guaranteed permanence. The Alpha King's gaze snapped toward him sharply. Stay out of this. Rhaegor barely reacted. You keep saying that while standing at my border asking for someone back who walked here willingly. That silenced him again. Nerissa looked at the man she once imagined building a future beside. And for the first time, she saw him clearly, not cruel, not heartless, just arrogant enough to believe she would always stay available while he decided whether she fit into the life he truly wanted. You already chose my future for me, she said quietly. His expression hardened slightly. Nerissa? No. She shook her head once. You chose uncertainty for me while promising certainty to someone else. The morning wind moved sharply through the trees around them. Then Nerissa stepped one pace farther back into Eastern territory, away from him. And that single step said more than any argument possibly could. No one spoke for several long seconds after Nerissa stepped farther into Eastern territory. The Alpha King watched her carefully now, not confidently anymore. Carefully, like he was finally realizing she stood beyond reach in a way that had nothing to do with distance. Rainwater dripped slowly from the edges of the border stones while Eastern guards remained perfectly still around them, waiting. Nerissa adjusted the strap over her shoulder again, ready to leave. The Alpha King noticed immediately. You're seriously going with him? Rhaegor answered before she could. No. That drew everyone's attention. Rhaegor looked at Nerissa calmly. She's choosing herself first. Silence settled again, because somehow that answer sounded far more dangerous than possession would have. The Alpha King stepped toward the border one final time. You don't know what waits for you there. Nerissa met his gaze steadily. I know what waited for me behind me. That hit hard enough to visibly stop him. Rhaegor studied her quietly afterward. No pressure, no commands, just observation. Finally, he spoke to her directly. You understand Eastern Territory won't become easier simply because you crossed into it. I'm aware. My enemies become yours if you stay. Nerissa nodded once. At least I'll know where I stand. The honesty of that answer almost made him smile. Almost. The Alpha King noticed the exchange instantly. You trust him already? Nerissa answered honestly. No. A brief silence followed. Then she continued softly. But he's honest about uncertainty. That landed exactly where it should, because uncertainty had never truly been the problem. False reassurance was, promises spoken privately while futures were offered elsewhere publicly. The Alpha King lowered his voice carefully now. Nerissa, come home. Home. The word echoed strangely inside her chest, because suddenly she realized something important. A place stopped feeling like home the moment you became temporary inside it. Rhaegor pushed away from the gatepost slowly. Decision made? Nerissa looked once toward the western road disappearing through the mist behind the Alpha King. The road back. The road she spent years walking emotionally without ever arriving anywhere certain. Then she looked east, forward, unknown, honest. Yes, she said quietly. The Alpha King inhaled sharply. Nerissa? But she stopped listening there, because for the first time in years, she finally understood something clearly. Choosing uncertainty honestly was less painful than waiting permanently for someone else to decide whether you belonged in their future. Rhaegor nodded once beside her, then turned toward the eastern road. And this time, Nerissa followed without hesitation. Morning sunlight finally broke through the storm clouds as they reached the eastern road beyond the border ridge. The rain had stopped completely. Only wet stone and drifting mist remained behind them. Nerissa walked quietly beside Rhaegor while the eastern guards followed at a respectful distance farther down the road. No one rushed her. No one questioned her decision again. Back at the border, the Alpha King still hadn't moved. She could feel it without turning around. The weight of someone standing exactly where they finally realized control had ended. Rhaegor glanced sideways at her after several silent minutes. You don't look back much. Nerissa kept her eyes ahead. There's nothing useful behind me. That's usually a painful realization. It was, she admitted softly. Just not today. The eastern road curved along the mountainside ahead, while cold wind moved through the pine forests surrounding them. For the first time in a long while, the future felt uncertain, but it also felt hers. Behind them, distant horse movement finally sounded from the border ridge, not pursuit, retreat. The Alpha King was leaving. Nerissa slowed very slightly at the sound. Rhaegor noticed immediately. Second thoughts? No. A beat. Just closure. Rhaegor nodded once like he understood, because maybe he did. After another few steps, he finally asked the question, waiting quietly between them since the border crossing. Do you regret not confronting him sooner? Nerissa thought about it honestly. The secret promises, the waiting, the hope she kept defending long after evidence stopped supporting it. Then she answered, No. Rhaegor looked mildly surprised by that. She explained quietly, If I confronted him earlier, he would have reassured me again. And you would have stayed. Yes. Silence settled thoughtfully between them. Then Rhaegor said, So, hearing the truth mattered more than hearing comfort. Nerissa nodded once. Truth ends things cleanly. The eastern fortress finally appeared through the thinning mist ahead. Stone towers, dark banners, a future completely unfamiliar. Rhaegor slowed slightly beside her. Last chance to reconsider. That almost made her smile, not because he expected her to leave, because he was giving her a choice anyway. Nerissa looked ahead calmly. He promised another woman the future, she said quietly, so I stopped building mine around him. Rhaegor accepted the answer with a single nod. Then, together, they continued east while far behind them, the Alpha King rode back toward the palace, finally understanding the difference between loyalty and permanence. Because the people who stay quietly the longest are often the ones who leave forever once they stop believing in the future they were promised.